Welcome to Furthering Christendom. I'm your host, Tyler McNabb, and I'm here with a very special guest today. We're here with Dr. Craig Bloomberg. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Craig, are you still at Denver Seminary or are you retired or what?
Yes to both of those questions. Um, I am technically retired, and therefore that means that the one course I teach each semester, I get paid minimal wage, but still enjoy doing it.
Still keeps you in the game, so to speak, right?
That's right.
Uh, well, I look forward to one day, Lord willing, being in your position. um, for those who don't know, Craig has a new book out, or at least came out maybe last year or something like that.
Late 2023. Yeah.
Oh, 2020. Okay, so a couple of years ago. And it's on the historical Jesus, but specifically looking at ritual impurity through the Gospel of John. So, for those viewers who are not familiar, the Gospel of John hasn't really played such a huge role in previous quests. Uh, Craig's book does an amazing job summarizing each of the individual quests for the historical Jesus. And so I thought we could maybe just start off from there. Can you kind of give us a history of, quests 1 through 3 at least? And why hasn't the Gospel of John played such a big role?
Right. Well, that's the first half of the book. Summarizing it in two paragraphs.
Right.
Albert Schweitzer, a very famous Nobel Peace Prize winner in the 1950s for his work as a medical missionary in Africa, before he even turned 30 and left Germany, had written a blockbuster of a book at the beginning of the 20th century called The Quest of the Historical Jesus, in which he surveyed countless works of the previous 120, 25 years or so, um, most of them, but not all, from Germany. And then, after showing how he believed there were inadequacies to everyone who had addressed what can we know about Jesus historically, if we don't presuppose Christian faith, portrayed a picture of Jesus as a thoroughgoing early first century Jewish apocalyptic preacher who thought God was imminently bringing in the kingdom, but as it turned out, was wrong. Um, and that work has had an incredible influence. It continues to be printed by numerous publishers and discussed in theological circles, but it at the time had such an effect on that area of specialization that things diminished considerably. People, for the most part, were not entirely convinced by Schweitzer, but they recognized how subjective the process had been, how many different approaches people had taken. Combining that with two world wars, which put universities on hold considerably, and you have a period up until the 1950s of a significantly diminished quest. Then there are a group of largely, again, German scholars who self-consciously talk about a new quest of the historical Jesus. They try to put things on more solid footing through what came to be known as the criteria of authenticity. What are the kinds of criteria that historians use or should use, and what emerges um, from, as we might say today, a database of a solid core of things we can know Jesus said and did. That had quite a lot of interest in the 50s and 60s, began to tail off a little bit in the 70s, And then in the 1980s, several writers, perhaps no one more important than E.P. Sanders, wrote books like Sanders called Jesus and Judaism. And their critique of the new quest was that fresh off of World War II, fresh off of the Nazi Holocaust of Jewish people, um, Jesus still looked a little too white European and not first century Jewish. Um, yes, everybody agreed that was his context, but he was the one Jew who didn't seem to share all the downsides and bad sides and nasty things about Judaism, which might not really have even been there in the first place. So Sanders got a huge following, a lot of critique, a lot of interaction, and people started saying, I think there's a third quest for Jesus that's a little different in a number of ways, but trying to keep this short, particularly because now Jesus is a credible first century Jew in all different ways, not just one feature that might be more of a caricature of him. Jewish scholars entered the field to an extent that they hadn't previously, and whatever else you came out with, Jesus was a believable first century Jew. And you're right, because John, if you read it, especially right after reading Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you'll go, wait a minute. He's giving us all kinds of information that the first three Gospels didn't. He's not repeating a lot of what they had. He's writing in a very different style, different theological emphases. Can this be the same Jesus? And if it is, how do we factor that in? And so the answer for 175 years or so, right up to the turn of the century, was we'll just put them on one side and we'll do our research out of the Synoptic Gospels, out of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but skipping all kinds of interesting things. A man by the name of Paul Anderson, a professor at George Fox University, convened at the Society of Biblical Literature a seminar on John, Jesus, and history. And if those three words just sound natural to you, then you haven't been in the academic guild because that was a bombshell. You can find history about Jesus out of the Gospel of John. But that seminar and the work that's come out of it has led to four detailed anthologies of scholarly articles, with two more that are underway, and some people, at least, starting to talk about a fourth quest of the historical Jesus that gives John parity with the synoptics. Doesn't mean they're committed to finding as much in John, but at least they're open to giving him a fair shot.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because you have your work here, you have the work you mentioned already. You have Michael Gorman's coming out with a volume talking about maybe John and Paul and their relationship, and it seems to be dating John earlier and seeing its historical value and so forth. So yeah, kind of curious. So with this kind of fourth quest, do you see John playing a much bigger role? One, two, um, how do you date John? How early do you date John? Does that even matter? Um, and three, do you think that Paul and John maybe like were in cahoots and could have maybe yeah, known each other a little bit and helped each other out and that sort of thing?
Um, yes. Another simple, short question. Um, Let me go backwards. Let me start with the
Yes.
last one. If you are trying to prove literary dependence, one work's knowledge of another work,
Mhm.
and compare John's gospel with a lot of the themes that are repeated in his letters with Paul, who never wrote a gospel but only wrote letters. I think it is difficult to convincingly show a literary dependence. But Dale Allison is one recent writer, among others, who has made the point there were not that many Christians, even in the late first century, for the leaders not to have known one another. Um, Paul and John, both, if we can believe both the book of Acts and what we can glean from their letters, spent significant amounts of time in Ephesus. Uh, if they were never there at the same time, they at least would have had all kinds of people who could talk to them about what the other taught and said. And with communities making copies
Mhm.
of letters that were addressed to them before sending them on to other places, the opportunity to read one another's works would have certainly been there. Um, and now the danger of going backwards is I forget your previous two
No,
questions.
no, no.
Um,
The dating of John.
Dating of
Yeah.
John, I don't think makes a big difference. Sure, if we had reason to think that we could put him in the 60s, like many conservatives would put Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that could be a boon. That doesn't seem to line up with the external testimony of the early church as well. So I'm happy to leave John in the late 80s or early 90s for the gospel, and other writings maybe a little bit later than that. And now the first question.
The first question was I forgot as well. It was the if they knew each other, if they what was the dating of John, and if the dating of John mattered. We'll just say it was those three. And you
Okay.
answered. um, what is your take? Um, oh, I remember what the question was. It was, do you think that the John will play a bigger role in the fourth quest? That was the
Well, almost by definition, if there is going to be something that um, scholarship on the whole acknowledges is different enough from the third quest to merit another number, that does seem to be the direction that things are going in.
yeah.
Not everybody is convinced it is going somewhere, and historians write after enough has been published that they think they can see patterns and trends, and we're not there yet. So maybe we're only in quest 3.5. I don't know.
Um, so what is your take and your volume regarding to like how do we authenticate the historical Jesus, so to speak? Do we use the traditional criteria? Obviously, there's a movement trying to go away from it with Chris Keith and others, where they want to kind of jettison that or at least minimize that and focus more on memory studies and that sort of thing. So, what's your take on all that, and what's the take that you have in this volume regarding authenticating the historical Jesus?
I am fascinated by Chris Keith's edited volume, along with spacing out now. There's a co-editor that he had. Um, because, yes, there are definitely some problems with some of the classic individual criteria that were used, particularly in the new quest, now often called the second quest, but an approach that both N.T. Wright and a trio of German scholars, um, Gerd Tyson, Dagmar Winter, and Annette Mertz, um, all developed all in the late 90s, um, called by Tom um, the double dissimilarity and double similarity criterion, and called by the Germans the criterion of historical plausibility, but then divided into four parts. Both basically say the same thing. And this is going to be a long if then sentence coming up. If you can point to something that makes good sense in an early first century Jewish context, it's not anachronistic in any way, and yet does have some twist to it, some unusual feature that we're not aware of other Jews doing or talking about or holding to. And if you can show that this is something the early church picked up on, it's not in any tension with Acts through Revelation or the early second century church. But again, they don't seem to have preserved all of Jesus' unique twists. So hopefully you can hear the two parts of similarity and the two parts of dissimilarity there. Giant comma, then with those four parts, maybe you do have strong grounds for saying, here is something Jesus most likely said and did. And it's interesting because Dagmar Winter is one of the contributors to Keith's volume. So apparently that's different enough from the older criteria that he's willing to go with it. And that's what I heavily rely on. I relied on it for a book that came out now more than 20 years ago, just on the historical reliability of John's gospel. But then I apply it to just one area. I say in the book that if I were 20 years younger, I might try to apply it across the Gospel of John and come up with some grand synthesis of what Paul Anderson keeps saying he is on the verge of finishing, but he's been saying that for 10 years now. So I hope he's not just bluffing, which would be a book that about Jesus that would deal across the spectrum with issues from this perspective. But I'll let you ask your next question. I apply it just to the whole area of Jesus and purity.
Yeah, well, that's exactly where I was just going to go. I was going to go with what does the theme of purity in the Gospel of John tell us about the historical Jesus?
And it's a theme that if you look at 10 random books on New Testament theology and they have chapters on John, might not even be present. But if I am working my way slowly through the gospel and bracketing the obvious big issues that somebody inclined to say, well, whenever John has an axe to grind, here's a topic he brings up, and these aren't things you can find in the synoptics, at least not easily. So we'll just assume John made this up. Things like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word was made flesh. And what's this, Jesus as the Word? You don't get that in the synoptics. No, I'm not talking about something like that. I'm not talking about it's only in John's gospel where John the Baptist calls Jesus the Lamb of God, and then Lamb of God becomes big in the book of Revelation. Only he becomes the slaughtered lamb who's now the warrior ram, conquering his enemies. No, I understand the logic of people who say a major theme that's distinctive could potentially be something that is less historical and more of a theological emphasis. No, let's ask a different kind of question. If I read each passage and bracket the obvious and for some people questionable material, is there anything that is a leitmotif, a smaller message? And the answer is yeah, lots in every passage. But now do that throughout the whole book. And is there something that keeps coming up again and again that if I am just looking at the big themes, I'm just looking at Jesus as the Son of God and the Messiah, the two titles that John 20:31 says John wanted people to believe in Jesus. Okay, I'm not looking at the big things. What might be there more often than I've noticed before? Because I was only looking for the big things. And I think one answer to that question is an awful lot of water, talk about water, places involving water, explicit teaching on cleansing, on purity. And that makes such good sense in an early first century Jewish context where people were still trying to follow their understanding of Old Testament law, where there were all kinds of things that could, on a sometimes daily basis, make you ritually impure and needing to take a special bath to go down to your community's local mikvah, unless you had one on your own property, uh, ritually submerge yourself in water and come out again. And for serious cases, wait a prescribed period of time, after which you would then again be ritually pure. It wasn't anything sinful like coming in contact with a corpse in a world without funeral parlors where people had to deal with their relatives when they died, or having mold or mildew in your house, or accidentally discovering you ate some non-kosher food. Uh, all kinds of things of daily life that could make you impure. But Jesus, in all kinds of implicit and occasionally explicit ways, tries to lead folks away from focusing so much on ritual purity to focusing on the much more important topic of moral purity. And if you say, well, did the synoptics ever talk about this? The answer is yes, they did. And again, not every textbook of New Testament theology mentions it. It's not a biggie. But if you have maybe the image of an archaeological dig is useful here, if you clear away all kinds of stuff from later centuries to get down to what you're digging for, well, here maybe we have to take passages in the Gospels and clear away all kinds of more obvious things that people always want to talk about and say, is there something at a lower layer that people wouldn't have wanted to talk about later? Because when you can read that Jesus declared all foods clean in Mark 7, and you can see Cornelius gets a vision of ham sandwiches from heaven. Well, that's not really what happened. Unclean food, and within a generation of Jesus' death and resurrection, the church is more Gentile than Jewish, and Gentiles didn't even have those same scruples. Nobody's going to want to be talking about ritual law. They're not even thinking about it anymore. So if I keep seeing this at the lowest level, the core of John and now some synoptic passages, maybe that's a theme that the historical Jesus had to deal with, that at first glance wasn't so much of an issue for later generations in church history until maybe you ask the awkward question, are there at least partial equivalents in our world today, in our church today? Are there people who are stigmatized as not necessarily more sinful, but somehow more untouchable? We hold them at arm's length. We create a caste system. Um, and suddenly I've got something every church should probably be talking about.
In your volume, if my memory serves me correctly, you argue that throughout the Gospel of John, that there becomes, I guess, a lesser emphasis on water purity and so forth, and then to where you get to the end and you have something maybe different. Can you I guess just say a couple words on that as we wrap up?
Well, yeah, you see it early on where the Samaritan woman by the well, Jesus uses this actual place of getting physical water to relieve thirst, to talk about a kind of a living water that if she understood who Jesus was, um, she could have eternal life. She doesn't really latch on to that. He has to say, "Oh, by the way, I'm the Messiah." Oh, you are? Well, let me ask you this question. No, no, that's not what I'm talking about either. So you get hints early on. You get it in John 7, much further along when now Jesus, by at a festival time in Jerusalem, where there is a water drawing ceremony, Feast of Tabernacles, and Jesus talks about rivers of water coming out of him and going into other people. And John says he was talking about the Spirit. But it's only after the resurrection when he breathes the Spirit on people and gives them that new stage and new ability to have eternal life. Um, we read in John 18:28, right at the tail end of Jesus' earthly life, um, Pilate is about to interrogate Jesus, but the Jewish leaders bring him to the palace, but they don't go in because the palace is unclean. It's a Gentile home. It probably had images of Gentile gods painted on the ceiling or floor or walls. And Pilate comes out understanding their scruples and takes Jesus inside. Wait a minute. You're just, he's guilty before being innocent. You don't give the same treatment to a respected Jewish leader? Or is their word already out that Jesus is somehow different, that it's not an issue for him? I've never heard anybody in church ask that question. I don't know if we know the answer, but it's a good question. Let's at least ask it.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. Um, uh, to kind of be in that environment and be able to see that, I think would be quite the thing. Well, as we let you go, are you working on anything else right now?
Always. Um, uh, Apart from a couple of revisions of things, I've got a book that's coming out later, maybe late spring, on themes in the book of James in the new Word Biblical Themes series to accompany the Word Biblical Commentary. And I'm well along into, but not anywhere close to the finishing line of a small commentary on First Peter
Oh,
for a series that Abilene University
cool.
Press, Abilene Christian University Press, is going to be publishing, the publishing arm of the independent Christian churches, Churches of Christ, Disciples of Christ, that whole restoration movement.
Sure.
Um,
Do you get into authorship of Peter at all in that?
oh, I'll be writing an introduction. I'm doing the introduction last after I've done. I always tell students write your introduction after you've written your paper so you know what you're introducing. Um, but yeah, I will have to get into that debate.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I've enjoyed our time, and I really did
Good.
enjoy your book and definitely recommend it. So,
Thank you very much. Blessings as you go to Vietnam.
thank you very much.